Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed. This is the NCF show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt. I'm a senior editor at the European Conservative, and I'm delighted to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, the host of Tomlinson Talks at thelotuseaters.com, and our special guest this week, Nick Dixon, presenter at GB News Headliners and host of the Current Thing podcast. Nick, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I've been told I can't turn my head for the mic, so thank you for having me.
There are some restrictions in
the next race.
Yeah, well, you'll loosen up throughout the course of the conversation. The Tories seem to have plumped for a leader who's more left-wing on immigration than Keir Starmer, seemingly for no other reason than that she's black, for one thing, and she gives off boss girl energy. Do you think that they'll be punished over the next 5 years for adopting that decision? And who do you think the main beneficiaries of that will be, Reform or Keir Starmer himself, who has been tacking to the right on immigration in particular lately?
Great question. Well, yeah, I feel somewhat chuffed because I was against Kemi, and I was team generic, which I even said at a sort of posh party with Kemi literally there, and all Kemi's backers, because I'm so autistic. I went around telling everyone I'm team generic. They're like, "Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Nick. I'm sorry to hear you haven't developed the social skills yet either."
Not as sorry as the Tory party will be when they make the wrong decision.
That's what I think, because if you look at it, she was soft on immigration. She had that stuff about even implying it could be higher, welcoming. What was that decision she welcomed? Some complicated.
It was her maiden speech in 2018 when she said, as a first-generation immigrant, she personally lobbied for the removal of caps on student and worker visas, which Keir Starmer cited in Prime Minister's questions about a week ago.
This is why we have Connor here. You see, I knew he'd just know all the facts. Just go to Connor, stats come out.
Also autistic.
Different kind. More useful kind, actually. But yeah, so I was always team generic because I chose to believe him on his Damascene conversion on immigration. He realized the Rwanda plan wasn't going to work, so he genuinely realized, okay, this is a disaster. And you can actually sometimes believe people like that who've been red-pilled on an issue. And I believed him personally. And he had a thorough, very long and boring, which is what you want, policy on immigration. I was like, I'm backing this guy. When I say I'm backing him, I'm not even a member of the Tories, so it's a purely kind of illusory backing or a tweet-based backing.
Yes.
But
you thought the right would be better served by him winning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we had all these kind of, I don't want to say liberal boomers because that would be rude. I won't say it, Trump style. I could say it, but I won't say.
Many people are saying,
but I won't say liberal boomers. But if I did, they were all saying, oh, it has to be Kemi. For the reasons you stated, they were like, oh, it's such a weapon. They can't say anything about her because she's not white. I'm like, how did that go for Suella Braverman, who was called Enoch Powell?
Or Purity Patel, who was drawn as a demon in the pages of The Guardian.
Right. As soon as you're on the wrong side, all that goes out the window. I'm amazed they don't know that by now. Yeah. And so Kemi, and there's also this issue of her being Nigerian, and you get into sort of sticky water here. But sticky water? Yeah, why not? Sorry, I'm still ill. You get into muddy water. No, sticky mud. Anyway, you get into some deep spleet because people don't write that and they call that racist. But actually, she basically touched down in the UK, then spent 16 years in Nigeria. And I don't think it's terrible to say that might be a slight issue. One, with understanding the country, as we saw with your working class, if you worked in McDonald's for 10 minutes and thinking that Halloween wasn't a tradition here when it was when I was growing up, and I'm old. So obviously there's some issues with understanding the country, but also if you're going to be the face of anti-immigration and you're basically an immigrant, even if not technically, there's just going to be a problem.
Well, the really helpful thing here is that we don't need to speculate. She made it very clear in her maiden speech, as Connor's just alluded to, that she identifies openly as a first-generation immigrant. She describes herself in that maiden speech as, to all intents and purposes, a first-generation immigrant. And it's not just a question of fully understanding the culture of Britain, which is obviously a concern, and given that she spent many of her formative years in Nigeria and in the United States, it makes sense that she would feel culturally distant from Britain in those respects. But it's also the fact that she tagged to her status as a first-generation immigrant the reasons why she was so in favour of immigration, because there's this sort of primitive reasoning which goes on where it's like, well, I am an immigrant, I am a good thing, therefore immigration in some sense must also be a good thing. She was actually lobbying for more relaxed work visas and student visas off the back of her status as a first-generation immigrant. So it's also a matter of her not understanding the culture very well necessarily, as illustrated in the McDonald's comment, but not really understanding or representing the best interests of the people who have in Britain who have long expressed a desire for immigration to come down, not to go up.
Well, if I can cut in and say something that will make Sundercat Waller tear himself in half like Rumpelstiltskin, I'll go a step further. She's not British, she's Nigerian. And I read that in her 2010 blog when she originally ran for Parliament, which The Spectator conspicuously omitted from its write-up of her previous blog posts, when she said, vote for Kemi Badenoch, a Nigerian candidate. By the way, here's my email mailing list, Nigerians for Kemi. Wouldn't you like me to represent Nigerian interests and ensure that Nigerian money laundering can't take place in the UK? And it's like, well, I'm completely so far removed from these issues that I don't feel you represent me because I'm an Englishman, you're a self-identifying Nigerian, and therefore why would I vote for someone if representation matters?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it would be different if she came out and said, I want mass deportations now, just the most anti-immigration candidate ever. We could talk about it, but if she was, it was a soft on immigration suspicion combined with all this.
Yes.
And it's not crazy to suggest it. I mean, if you wouldn't really have an English person being the leader of Nigeria, it just wouldn't really come up. And if we can have a context where the England football manager, all mainstream pundits were saying, should be an English person, right? In the end, it turned out to be a German. What happened there? But Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher,
Nigel Farage.
yeah, these are not far right guys. These are mainstream football pundits. I think it should be. To be fair, I think it should be an English person this time. And everyone just went, yeah. So it can't be that controversial, but it's used obviously against the right as you're just a big racist.
I think it also comes from the fact that today we are liable to conflate belonging to a particular country or belonging to a particular place with being a good person. And that's partly because we talk about our identities today in terms of values rather than in terms of just primordial things that we have. And so the implication is that if someone is not British, you must be insulting them in some way because they must not be measuring up to said values. But I think that's also another problem because if you think about it properly, it's not insulting to say that you're not Turkish. It's not insulting to say that you're not Japanese. It's not insulting to say that I'm not Nigerian. I'm just not these things. But in Britain, because we define our belonging these days, not in sort of identitarian terms, but in moral terms, if someone is being called not British, you must be making a moral evaluation of them. You must be saying that they're defective in some way.
Do you know what? I just laughed because it reminded me of, I was living in a flat a while ago and I was in the group WhatsApp chat, which is always a mistake, but it starts off about bins and pretty soon it's about politics and the people are saying the Tory government is far right, but if anyone else comes in and says something pro-Trump, they get banned from the group. They're like, so is it a political group or not? Anyway, it gets ridiculous. But I just remember one comment where people said the Turkish kids, because they were trying to describe something that had happened, like some glass was on the floor or something, and people said, can we not say it Turkish? He's a country. That's Turkish. I was just like, isn't that insulting to Turkey to say, don't call them Turkish? This was a great empire. But, so I thought it was bizarre. But just quickly, just to make sure I don't misrepresent myself, my primary concern was never actually this. It was that if she was soft on immigration, but it was actually that she was really the anti-woke liberal candidate. She was not, in my opinion, on the right or a conservative, really. She did talk about Scruton. She talked about being the child of Scruton and Sowell. But it really seemed to me she's an anti-woke liberal. And the people who are aligning with her, people I like, Graham Linehan, Andrew Doyle, genius. And Toby Young, who I did a podcast with. So it wasn't like I hate these people, but the anti-woke liberals were going, I really like Kemi. And I go, okay, yeah, because she's an anti-woke liberal. But that's different from being actually on the right, whereas Jen seemed like you might actually be somewhat conservative.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean? Because I think I know what you mean, but by anti-woke liberalism and why that's defective in a way that being a proper conservative is not.
It's just a different thing. It's that you are sound on these absurd issues like the trans issue and women's sports, etc. There's a whole host of them. The sort of most superficial, most absurd,
sort of low-hanging fruit culture.
The low-hanging fruit culture or stuff, which is important. It's not that obviously puberty blockers for children is horrific and obviously needs to be dealt with.
Yes,
but it's not going to make me think this person's the future of the country when immigration is the primary issue and a number of other issues. They also need to be dealt with. But I think Jeremy would have dealt with them as well. Whereas Kemi's like, look how she owned them on woke, which is all fun and games. It's a good clip, but it's not who I want from the conservative leader.
Well, first of all, her anti-woke credentials themselves are in question because she, was strong on the trans stuff, as was Liz Truss and Miriam Cates and all sorts of other, let's say, insurgent backbench MPs. But she still gave money to I think it was a Race Equality Commission.
Race Equality Foundation.
Race Equality Foundation, thank you. Touted that. She said diversity is our strength at the dispatch box, which I consider to be a racial slur against the indigenous population of this country, because you're implying that if left unenriched by diversity, we would somehow be weak. Tell that to the British Empire that we built without mass immigration. And also, when you're talking about anti-woke liberals, I think that the elephant in the room there is the immigration issue. because it seems to me that the anthropology of liberalism is of the sort of self-generative, blank slate person. And so hypothetically, all they need to do is come over to Britain, buy into British values rather than some sort of identity that Robert Jenrick was talking about, and it's just fine. And so hypothetically, it's just a question of integration rather than of numbers and rather than of the consent of the country as to whether or not they want any of these people here in the first place. And so when Kemi Badenoch talks about a central integration strategy, I think it sounds pretty condescending, actually, to be told how my country's culture should be managed by an outsider to sufficiently integrate lots of outsiders who wouldn't necessarily want to be here in the first place. Whereas Robert Jenrick had a completely different strategy and said, look, some of these people are unassimilable because they will never want to buy into our rendition of civilization. They will never have our identity, even if you can distill it down to some Blairite values. And so they should be made to leave. And I think that was the clear dividing line between Kemi and Jenrick. Kemi was just unwilling, and has always been, and has made it worse, to address the immigration question.
Very interesting. Yeah. And one thing I'd like to add, which is maybe going backwards a little bit in the argument, but I did put this in a video I did about it. When you're saying that it's de facto good that you have a black candidate, so partly they're saying it's because it will be harder for Starmer to attack her the dispatch box, which I don't believe in anyway, but that's part of the argument. But when the chairman brings her up and says, isn't it great that we've got we have the first black leader, we're the first party to do it, and we've beaten Labour. It's all very strange to me because you're saying that that's a value in and of itself. But at the same time, I called it Schrodinger's Kemi, right? Because on one hand, they're saying we're all about merit. She's reached this position by merit, and James Cleverly was sort of saying this. But at the same time, they were saying, but isn't it great that she's black? And we don't do identity politics, we do merit. But isn't it great she's black? Well, which one is it? Because those are opposite.
James Cleverly said pale, male and stale about the Labour front.
Yes. And then in the follow-up, he tried to fudge it and say he's making a point about merit, but he was trying to own Labour. So they're trying to do both things. They're trying to own Labour on identity politics and thus engaging in identity politics while saying, but we're just all about merit. But you've got to pick one. And Kemi, to be fair, has done it less than the rest of the party have done it. She was smiling and laughing when the chairman introduced her like that. She could have come up and said, by the way, it's not actually significant that I'm black. I'm just the first leader. Much in the way that Thatcher did about being a woman. She just completely shut it down. It's not about being a woman. It's just about, the best candidate or whatever she said. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along those lines. It was very much, no, don't talk about this. Whereas obviously people like Rachel Reeves, like, I'm the first female chancellor. Like, no one cares about that. It's not even a proper glass ceiling. But Thatcher shut that down. Kemi could have shut that down. She hasn't. So there's never been this. So it's been this paradox. Like we're meritocratic. Oh no, we're identity politics when it suits us. And she did that as well, as you know, with the Neil Tennant thing. That's his name, isn't it? David Tennant. Who have I said? Oh, the Pet Shop Boys. Yeah, sorry, Neil. The Pet Shop Boys. I'm older. That's the lead singer of the Pet Shop Boys.
All right.
Who's not been involved in this. Actually, to be fair, he stayed out of it. But I could easily imagine having a wry song about it with a good keyboard backing. But yeah, it was David Tennant. And she said, oh, you're a rich white male. And people said, no, she was just using their terms against them. So I was like, I think she was defaulting to identity politics when it's
and in order to terrify the heebie-jeebies out of people, when they argue that she didn't actually mean anything wrong. But I mean, the most outrageous defense of it, as I saw, was from Jacob Rees-Mogg on GB News when Stephen Edgington pressed him on it. He said, "Oh no, think about it. Conservatives, we believe in wealth creation, and Kemi also called David Tennant rich. So by white, if she can't have meant anything rude by rich, because we believe in wealth creation as conservatives, she can't have meant anything bad by white either. What I say to that is, if it had been David Baddiel, and she had said, oh, he's just a rich male Jew, doesn't matter, no one needs to care about what he thinks. If she said that,
withdrawn.
Sorry?
She would
have had the whip withdrawn instantly. So this get out is not convincing, it's purely disingenuous.
Well, she's used that pejorative before when she said about her fellow university classmates as stupid white lefties.
Yes.
So it seems to be a reversion to type for her. But I think we're discussing this all in the context of the recent net migration numbers coming out, it being revised up the previous year to 906,000.
From 740 or something, yes.
Yeah, quite. And when you said, is Keir Starmer or Reform going to capitalise on this, I wanted to possibly carve out some time to discuss them as well, because Kemi Badenoch's record as a membership of the Conservative Party, having directly overseen this and influenced the rules around loosening immigration and leading to the Boris wave that we're now all stuck with, which is visually evident but also culturally evident because 86% of the migrants that arrived in the last were from outside the EU. So you just notice it. Completely transforms the demographics and the culture of our towns and cities. Also to the extent where the ONS revealed, as of this week of recording, that Mohammed is now the most popular baby name in England. Not in Wales at 63rd, but in England specifically. Axel has fallen out of the top 100 for reasons we all know, by the way. I find it interesting that as soon as this has come out in the same week, Nigel Farage has said, with the pickup of Dame Andrea Jenkins, that he thinks half the Tory parliamentary party would be eligible to join the reform. And I'm just thinking, which half? Because more than half oversaw this mass demographic change with the Boris wave, and so they're as guilty as Kemi is. So do you think Reform are properly capitalising on this weakness, or are they letting Keir Starmer take too much rhetorical ground?
That is a great question, and it is actually the latter. As we record today, Boris has just brought out an advert for his book, yet another plug for his book, and he's doing a Christmas list. And it's a fairly amusing advert, but you just think, no, Boris, we're not going to forgive you for this. Like, this bombing thing is not going to work anymore because what you've done to the country is horrific. I mean, I said Unleashed turned out to be his immigration policy. That's basically, it's also the name of his book. But so Boris he has to have his whole legacy revised, which people already had a fairly dim view of it. But now I just think he's just the person who destroyed the country. And Starmer, as you say, is rightly capitalized. He's gone far right. He's talking about this was a deliberate destruction of the country, which was stunning. I mean, to say it was by design, that's what every right-wing conspiracy theorist has been saying. So that's stunning. And Farage, he seems to almost be allowing Starmer to take that ground. It's quite strange. I mean, if you only just care about it getting done, maybe it doesn't matter who's saying it. But if you care about reform, they're missing all sorts of own goals. But in the last few days, as we record, it could change again. I've started to sort of see reform as maybe not for me because obviously Ben Habib left and Farage was pretty rude about him. And I just think they are just a liberal party. I've thought it for a while. I mean, I'm just here calling everyone liberal. Kemi's liberal, Reform are liberal.
Well, except for Rupert Lowe.
Except for Rupert Lowe, who seems really great. And they're race-showing Starmer on every tweet, absolutely brutally, which is so good. Or Clive Lewis wanted to welcome the migrants. He said, can they stay in your house, Clive? And they're just getting destroyed on Twitter. So on the immigration question, now Starmer today, as we record, has done these milestones, which is another one of his meaningless bits of fluff, but he doesn't put immigration in there. Yeah. And his argument was, when it's just so obvious. In a way, that's quite a flex. It's like, you obviously have to have a strong board. I'm not even put it in my pledges because that's just day one. But will he actually do it is a different question. But certainly rhetorically, when he came out and made that statement, it was an open goal that's been waiting for him to bother to put it in the net, and he finally did. It just buries Kemi, it buries the Tories. To me, they feel completely irrelevant. Jenrick could have brought them back a little bit, but they feel completely irrelevant. Starmer's taken them out of the game with that immigration speech. And Reform are kind of hovering around, trying to pick up Tories. They've picked up a couple of councillors. They've got Andrea Jenkins, and they're just becoming the new Tories, aren't they? Which is fine, but it's like, okay, I'm starting to think party politics is just not for me. I did vote for Reform, but I'm like, you want to be the new Tories. The Tories are totally wet. Labour have gone further right on immigration. Very confusing time. I think it could be like Dominic Cummings says, where we get three parties split on around 20-something%. So the Reform try to destroy the Tories, but don't quite do it. And so then maybe they even overtake the Tories, but they're kind of hanging around. And then it's more interesting what comes next. When Cummings said that, he may have been thinking of a Dominic Cummings vehicle that comes next and sweeps to victory. But I'm starting to think like that because I think, to me, Reform are just, they're not capitalising, and they seem to, like, getting into the House of Commons seems to have spent their energy. It's like just becoming mainstream is their whole focus, without much of a thought of what we'll do when we get there.
I think there are two things. There's one is a gift that the Conservatives have given Labour, and another is a potential gift that Labour are giving Reform at the moment. And I suppose your case is that they're not taking sufficient advantage of it. In the case of what the Conservatives bequeathed Labour, it's precisely because they have bequeathed to Labour such astronomically high immigration rates that more or less anything Keir Starmer does at this point, even if he just cuts it in half, we still have a net immigration running at 450,000 a year, which would have been unimaginable in the 1990s. It's still not back down to that tens of thousands that David Cameron promised in 2010. And so there's a sense in which the bar has been set so low for Starmer that he will be able to jump it fairly easily. And I imagine that what we will get in terms of policy here off the back of this seemingly dissident right rhetoric, and at the level of actual policy, what we will get is a case of the frog being boiled slightly slower, but being boiled nevertheless. And so that's one thing that the Conservatives have massively gifted Labour, because the Boris wave now trumps anything that Tony Blair ever did. In terms of what Labour are potentially bequeathing to Reform, or to people, or more to people like us who want Reform to do better and to be truer to its own mission, its own pedigree, the fact that Starmer is tacking right on immigration means that he could now perform part of the function that we all wanted Robert Jenrick to perform if he were to lead the Conservative Party, namely to engineer a sort of right-wing arms race, and basically challenging Farage, saying, look, you've got Farage, you've got a Starmer tacking to the right on all of these questions, in many ways engaging in much bolder rhetoric than you've done in the last 4 to 5, 6 months or so, when you've been watering down your policy perspectives, when you've been watering down your rhetoric, when you've been appeasing the forces of political Islam rather than wanting to confront them head on and save the country in the way that those of you want to happen. If you want to stay relevant in politics, you need to be bold on this, and you need to be true to your mission. And what you cannot do is invalidate the reason for your existence, which is the desperate need for a frame-breaking alternative in British politics. There's a sense in which Starmer's rhetoric here might force Farage to radicalise.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Starmer notably wouldn't give a figure again, would he? You mentioned the hundreds of thousands, in the past, the tens of thousands figure was repeatedly given, so he's refusing to give a figure. But as you say, any cut will look like he's done something. And you can say, look how low we've got immigration. So yeah, it's an absurd open goal. Tories deserve to be destroyed for it, hence the Zero Seas campaign, as you're well aware.
Yes.
But yeah, it does leave Farage in a strange position, doesn't it? I mean, what is, if Starmer is tough on immigration, what is Farage's offer? Does it become about Thatcherite economics, which they're very big on? Because that's one area where Labour have done very bad. They've got this anti-growth budget. They've now had to do milestones just after you've done the budget. You're having to reset 5 months into government. That's extraordinary. After you've just done a budget, how many times are you going to reset and relaunch? This is absurd. Because as we record, his approval rating is minus 32. It's worse than Trump's approval in the UK. Clarkson's, for context, is plus 15. Clarkson could run now with just a spade and just become prime minister. He can go in with a trowel and a tractor. It's absolutely ridiculous. The most popular. I mean, he is, in a way, what we want from Farage, but Farage won't kind of seize it. And I did a sort of funny video about, is Clarkson the new Trump? Is he the man? But he kind of is. But Farage doesn't seem to quite want to do it. But he might come back. Do you remember when Trump was slightly in the wilderness in the DeSantis era? Yes. By the way, the DeSantis thing is a bit similar to Kemi. All the people who wanted DeSantis were the same people that want Kemi, whereas I said, let's stick with Trump. It's sort of similar.
It's slightly similar. We don't have to. I just want to voice dissent here and say I don't think it's entirely similar. We can go into it if you want.
It's only similar because Boomer Libs liked it.
Yeah, in that respect, I will grant you that it's similar.
But there was a moment where he came back with that speech that was criticised as low energy, and people said, is Trump done? Which is hard to imagine.
His launch speech, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't say this, but then he came back, and then the assassination attempt, so on and so on, Elon Musk, the rest is history. And I never wavered on Trump, but Farage can do this. He can sort of sound something, you're like, why are you sounding so wet suddenly? Then another day, he can come back bullish again, and so you never know.
It's true, and that's he's responsive to incentives, potentially, in the way that Trump is. I mean, you could argue that what really gave Trump's campaign, or his second campaign, an injection of adrenaline, was the lawfare against him. And so he showed himself to be responsive to events, to stimuli. Likewise, as I'm saying, if Starmer is sort of, monopolizing the discourse on being a restrictionist, again, obviously not seriously at the level of policy, but in terms of what he's talking about, I mean, I've got it written down here: open borders experiment, orchestrated and planned, not by accident. I mean, he's a whisker away from actually saying Boris waves.
Yes, but the reason he's doing this, and I think people need to keep their eye on this, is Tony Blair telegraphed this in The Guardian, speaking to Bithakria back in July, the week after the election. And he said, we need to get a grip on immigration to head populists off at the pass.
Yes.
So this is a Tony Blair containment strategy. He's seen it in the polls, and Satan himself has picked up the phone and gone, Keir, get your act together. We're doing digital IDs, and we're reversing Brexit. This is what this is about. This is a de facto reversal of Brexit, because he's blamed the Boris wave on Brexit. As you've often said, Harrison, it's because the globalist drones were carrying it out, like Michael Gove, not because of the constitutional questions of Brexit, but led us to have 250,000 Indians brought to our shores every single year. What Keir Starmer's saying is, as Tony Blair has said, you've got all these African and Indian migrants milling about in your town centres and taking your benefits because of Brexit. So why don't we instead establish a freedom of movement bill with an under-30s European cohort only, and set the cap at what the OBR, this ostensibly neutral institution that we've invested with more powers, sets it, which is the expected number of 315,000 that they said back in March. So what we'll probably see is a containment measure of net migration, 315,000 a year, and it's going to be only EU citizens. And that means EU passport holders, not EU nationals. So you're still going to get similar types of ethnic demographics, except you're going to get sub-Saharan Africans with German passports instead.
Can I just say two things I wanted to reply to? One, you're basically saying Farage needs a mugshot. That's what to come back and get some lawfare against him.
Yes.
But on your point, why did Blair, if it is Blair, the Dark Lord, why did he wait so long? And why did Starmer decide to throw the country under the bus over Southport before he decided to actually do this?
I don't think he waited so long. Tony Blair, they rebuked him on AI investment and they rebuked him on digital IDs immediately after the election. I think Starmer wanted to go it alone, and then Southport tanked his popularity, and now they're going back cap in hand to say, why won't you save us from our own opinion polls? I think that's what's happened.
I say, and do you think it's the petition or the -32 approval rating or something else?
It's a combination of all of these things.
Right.
It's just
None of them are great.
They're different aspects of the same phenomenon, aren't they?
True. They're all under the We Hate Starmer
Exactly.
heading. Yeah.
Do you think that? So I mean, I know we're voicing dissent here about reform that we've all voiced before. What in particular would you, if you had Farage's ear, what would you be telling him to do differently? At a kind of hyper-specific level.
Well, yeah, I would. Well, he can be bolder on things like mass deportations because he was a bit wet on it in the Stephen Edgerton interview, and then he was a bit bolder on it in the Winston Marshall interview. He can be bolder on things like that because that's where people are.
You think he was bolder in the Winston Marshall interview?
I think I didn't watch all of it. Didn't he roll back a bit on what he said?
No, not at all. He said, Winston Marshall said, you've said you're not going to do mass deportations, so are you going to give amnesty? And he went, no, we can't do amnesty.
Okay.
And he said, but you can't do mass deportation. He said it can't be done. So he's just going to let them exist in the country. Whereas Rupert Lowe, on his Winston Marshall interview, actually corrected Winston when Winston said it's 1.2 million, how are you going to deport them all? He said, no, it's more and we need to do it anyway.
Okay. So that's me going off half-member clips, which is a bad tactic. So, okay, so he's been unnecessarily wet on mass deportations. His comments on Islam in that interview I did find very strange as well. I mean, I jokingly said they were taken from Michelle Welbeck's submission, but that's just me having a bit of fun trying to get myself in trouble. But so those are a couple of things. Also, he seems determined to constantly throw a section of his base under the bus at every opportunity, which is a kind of the right. Okay, now he might say he's talking about the nutter right, but when you just hear like, oh, get rid of that lot, and there's weirdos online, and you know, he just wants Labour voters, but why do it at the expense of people who've actually voted for you? Because now I'm feeling alienated, and I voted for them. And I know loads of people like that.
Well,
and they're upset about Ben Habib. You as well.
Well, I voted for Richard Tice in my local constituency in 2021, and the other day he called me garbage twice.
Why? And why is that? That's a strange instinct. I mean, Farage saying that good riddance to Ben Habib is a champagne moment was bizarre because everyone knows and likes Ben. It's just crazy. It's been on my podcast. And Tice throwing you under the bus for a critical article. But it was
friendly critical.
It wasn't like a hit job. It was a fairly intellectual article.
It was me saying basically copy the Trump model and you'll do what we need you to do and you'll win because I want you to win.
Yeah.
So I think they're just very sensitive to criticism.
But you know what I take from this? Konstantin Kisin defended Tice basically against you. And so I go, okay, I accept your terms. You're a Liberal Party. I say it dispassionately. I'm not mad. I'm not crying. I'm not literally shaking. But I go, okay, it's in the friend-enemy distinction, which we all know about. Your friends are Liberals, like Konstantin, or you know, sort of left, centre-left, pro-Israel Liberals, or whatever you call them. Whatever, I don't know how he defines himself, but and Israel's a whole other can of worms. But you're basically Liberals, and people more on the right, maybe or more conservative, maybe at Lotus is you know, under the bus, right? I knew Culture Forum, not just Lotus. But you know, if he's throwing you under the bus and Snyder and Konstantin, isn't that what they're saying? Now Rupert Lowe is saying something different. It's a bit confused.
This is why I think Reform's a divided party, and this is why I'm not willing to condemn the party overall, but I am disappointed by Nigel and Tice's direction of travel. Rupert Lowe is saying exactly what we want to hear, and he's stronger on policy and actually has policies in mind, whereas Reform doesn't have many official policies at the moment. I mean, again, Nigel on election day on July 4th said we're going to leave the ECHR and deport all illegal immigrants, and then immediately backs off of it. So I don't think even he knows what he wants. I think if Reform just double down on Rupert Lowe's strategy, then they'll win, and they'll win back over all of those people like you and me who feel a little bit estranged.
I think another problem as well is that even though there are certain shades of each of the Reform MPs that are worth admiring, and not, they all have their moments, their good moments, and obviously they all have their slightly underwhelming and disappointing moments as well, some more so than others. One problem is that we're talking about people here who have entered into politics more with honourable instincts and particularly, you know, but highly specific hobby horses in certain cases, rather than people who have a very kind of sort of coherent intellectual, well-formed worldview. I mean, I think this is certainly true with Farage. It was, of course, always about Brexit. It was that was his sort of single-minded mission. That's what brought him into politics, and everything else sort of just came in alongside that. Some bit of Thatcherite economics, obviously, some restrictionism as well, but it wasn't really well thought out, which is partly why I think he, probably more than anyone else, has been, in a way that I've said that I wasn't ultra surprised that Brexit led to more immigration rather than less. I don't think Farage was really kind of thinking in those terms. Likewise, Tice is very, very obsessed and very, very interested. And I'm not saying that any of this is wrong, by the way, but in sort of net zero and sort of supply side reform.
He'd make an amazing chancellor.
He'd make a good chancellor, yes. And Rupert Lowe, likewise, is very interested in that sort of Thatcherite economic model. That's sort of that they kind of bring that to politics, and as such, it means that often you get them struggling to contend with new situations because the kind of the contingent circumstances which explain why they're in politics in the first place about 20, 30 years ago, rather than contending with present day realities. And so you'll get them making really sort of elementary category errors, which Farage makes all the time. For example, when he talks about how, I'm very, very concerned about the cultural change in Britain and the rise in sectarianism, but I have no problem whatsoever with the demographic makeup of the country, as though those things can be extricated from one another when they're of course inextricably related. Anyone would acknowledge this in Northern Ireland, that without the immigration of the Scots-Irish into Ulster, there wouldn't have been the sort of rampant sectarianism we saw over the subsequent 4 centuries. The more different peoples you have living alongside each other, the more there are going to be clashes of cultures, clashes of civilization.
You think can't be separated? Our country full of Mohammeds are not to by British values, Harrison.
Even less proximate than Scots-Irish in the 17th century, yes.
There was a slightly absurd moment in that Steve mentioned in the interview where he said, "Are you concerned about these changing demographics?" No, exactly. But what about? But I am concerned about places becoming less English in their culture. I'm like, okay, so we have 100% Japanese people in the country, but they're all Christians, and they're all
playing cricket.
Yeah, they're all playing cricket. It's absurd, obviously, but To defend Farage and be a bit fair, obviously his achievement has been extraordinary as a campaigner, as a charismatic individual. It's unlikely you have all of it, right? If you're that type of figure, you may not have all the boring policy stuff. So you do, but what you do need to do is listen to boring policy people and accept it. And that seems like what he won't do. So in the case of Farage, I mean, I've been accused of purity spiraling around reform, which is so funny because around Trump, I'm completely pragmatic and just cult-like devotion to Trump because I just think he's earned it. And even if he goes and does some odd things and some things I don't agree with, I think overall the direction of travel, I said to Nima Parvini, it's like the choice between Trump and Kamala Harris was a choice between a Big Mac and a plate of bugs. So it's no choice at all. The Big Mac's not perfect. It's not perfectly nutritious. You might feel a bit empty later, but it's a great slice of Americana. And with the bugs, it's no choice. But with reform, it doesn't seem as clear to me, and they don't inspire the same loyalty. Partly because they keep trying to bin people like me off in the way that Trump doesn't.
But it's also not purity spiraling if you're saying, "Here's what Trump did. It let him win. This is what we want you to do, and it will help you win."
Yes, and the purity spiraling inherently is suggesting there's something utopian and unrealistic about it. There's a model for it across the Atlantic in a very culturally proximate, similar country to us, built by Englishmen. I don't see why that can't be built here. Nick Dixon, thank you very much for joining us on Deprogrammed this week. It's been a pleasure. Connor, thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.